Hello. Welcome back to you, our wonderful audience, for our third in a series of 3 conversations, part of our 2023 LiterARTure series, Girls Gone Rogue.
Oh, can we have that one again next year? I love going rogue.
Next year, bras will be optional, even for you, John. Okay.
That's no longer rogue.
It's preferred. Well, for any of you who don't know us at this point, consider yourself lucky. No. I am Stacey Goldring, and to my left, my amazing partner, Cindy Edelman.
Keep it up. You've already insulted me so many times this morning.
Okay. Each LiterARTure season, we dedicate one program to how the Holocaust is represented in the arts and literature. Today, our talk is entitled, Her Voice. I will delve into the life of German-born historian and political philosopher Hannah Arendt, and Cindy will bring to light the amazing artist Charlotte Salomon, whose brilliant work miraculously survived the Second World War.
How many of you all know what searching for identity is? Oh, good, most of you. So in case you don't know what searching for identity is, LiterARTure, this series that Stacey and I are
Hatched.
Is a program under the umbrella of searching for identity. If you don't know, about 10 years ago, Stacey started a writing program for second-generation children of Holocaust survivors. And she recently released a film. She wrote and directed a film called Traces, which has been shown repeatedly on public television. And I just wanted to just say a couple of things. One is that the proceeds from our 3 talks goes back into searching for identity so that Stacey can produce more films and spread her magic all over our community and the country for that matter. And I would just I'm very grateful to those of you who braved the weather and came out today.
Thank you.
And joined us. I hope you'll enjoy our program.
Oh, it's my turn?
Yeah, it is
okay.
your turn. Okay.
Thank you, Cindy.
I didn't write that. She wrote it this time. Oh,
you know,
Lord.
my board meetings, as John very well knows, we have a script. I mean, we get things done. So anyway, that wasn't in the script.
I'm a board member too.
I know. Okay, moving forward. To find out more about searching for identity, support our work. If you're interested in underwriting literature next season, please visit me anytime, day or night, or go to searchingforidentity.org. To learn more about Traces, the film, then you go to tracesfilm.org. At the end of our talk, we will have a big reveal about next season's theme. So make sure, little did you know,
And it's a good one.
little did you know, Marlene and Barbara, please raise your hands if you want to sign up next season to be the first to know about our upcoming season and our LiterARTure retreat. Little did you know.
I know, she sprung that on me.
If you want to know about that as well, those are the people that you see, and they'll go ahead and check it on the roster. Sorry, we're doing this in real time, and then we'll make that list happen. Thank you so much. Okay.
Such a joy.
And now it is time to introduce the voices of Hannah and Charlotte. I remember working in the kitchen where I used to live in Boca Raton, Florida. And I was listening to NPR, naturally. And I was making dinner. And I heard someone on the radio use a term that stopped me dead in my tracks. So I washed my hands and I grabbed something like a receipt. It was oblong, it was long. And I remember writing down 3 words. And then I underlined it. Banality of evil. And I remember thinking, that's it. That is the most dangerous thing I had ever heard. This kitchen epiphany happened over 30 years ago, but your presence here today allows me to bring this term full circle. Each season in literature, we dedicate one program where we recognize the Holocaust impact through the arts, and the written word. It is fitting that this afternoon I have the opportunity to add the author who coined this term, banality of evil, Hannah Arendt, to our understanding of this important history. Arendt refused to be categorized. She rejected all labels. But we need context, and I need words to call her something. So forgive me, Hannah. I'm going to go with philosopher, political theorist, or author. And if I had to tweet about her overall theory, I think the essence of her work would be, think for yourself. Anything less than that can lead to evil. So I leave it for you to think and decide whether Hannah Arendt is an anathema or if you're an Arendtian at heart. That's a real word. Hannah Arendt had no children, smart woman, but I did. Oh, I did. And lo and behold, I want you to know that this year I had the perfect Mother's Day. And trust me, this was an Olympic feat. And let me tell you why. Because this year, I spent the whole day reading outside, and it was a beautiful day. I was completely immersed in Arendt's work, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil.
What does that say about her? We're laughing about Hannah Arendt. I mean, really.
Published in 1963. I bet you spent Mother's Day quite differently, but that's okay. And you may be thinking, perhaps, that there really is no place to be glib or lighthearted when discussing the Holocaust. It's poor judgment. It's insensitive. It's despicable. But it is precisely this type of criticism, this type of storytelling, this tone, that is a small example of what makes Hannah Arendt controversial to this day. Because one of the many scathing criticisms of Arendt is her voice. So let's take a look at her timeline and understand why the fallout from Eichmann in Jerusalem has made her a controversial and hated philosopher who has been accused of being an anti-Semite. I will leave it to you then to think and decide for yourself about her important lessons and legacy. Now, in retrospect, this won't surprise you, Cindy and I weren't thinking straight when we decided to add Arendt to our literature lineup.
Who wasn't thinking straight?
We thought it'd be amazing and exciting, and although that's true, I am here to report to you that today, this is my debut and final act when it comes to covering a philosopher, okay? I had no idea what we were thinking or drinking at the time. So please understand, I am not an academic. My only PhD is in the philosophy of worry and lamentation. And because philosophy is full of debate esoteric ideas, big words that I can't pronounce, and contradictions, know that everything I say about Arendt can be disputed. And when I think of philosophers, I rarely think of women. Before I researched Arendt, I knew little. Maybe she was Jewish, maybe she was anti-Semitic, maybe she had an affair with like a Nazi philosopher guy, name started with an H, I don't know. Surely I could do better. So here goes. Born in 1906, Johanna Arendt was the only child to Paul, an engineer, and Martha Cohen Arendt, a musician. They were a German-Jewish couple who lived in Hanover. Her mother's family were Cohens from Lithuania. This is interesting because here in Jacksonville, Florida, we have a large Lithuanian Jewish community that makes up most of the conservative Jewish population here in town. So who knows, because it's such a small world, we could have someone here who was related to the Cohens on Hannah's side. This is a distinct possibility because there's so few Jewish people. Okay, now her father loved classics, and Hannah's home library was a dream. It was dense with books in which she became immersed. We like to see them as comfortable, well-educated, cultured, secular, surrounding themselves with dynamic, intellectual, the enlightened set. She recalls her family was completely Germanized, even though Jewish people did not have equal rights. Now, if you belong to the temple, congregation Ahavat Hesed, its roots are with the German Jews who settled in Jacksonville way before the conservative community got here in the mid-19th century. So at 3 years old, they moved to Königsberg, where the young Hannah grows up. Her father, suffering from syphilis, passes away in 1913 when she was 7 years old. Now, growing up during the First World War, her education was interrupted several times, but not her zeal for learning. She learned ancient Greek, and her mother brought her up with Goethe principles of normal development, and air quotes, including self-discipline, constructive channeling of passion, and a responsibility for yourself and then others. She devoured literature, philosophy, poetry. Growing up, she also became more aware of anti-Semitism, seeing her Jewishness as a negative. Fiercely independent and outspoken, in 1922, Arendt was expelled at the age of 15 from school for leading a boycott against a teacher who insulted her.
Today that would be normal.
That's so true. Today it'd be normal. No matter, she goes to the local University of Berlin and audits classes in the classics and Christian theology. In 1924, she receives her bachelor's from the University of Königsberg and did postgrad studies at the University of Marburg with the existentialist philosopher Martin Heidegger. So two important things to point out here and one little gossipy thing. So Heidegger may ring a bell because he was another massively influential German philosopher focusing on the meaning of life or being human and what role language plays in shaping our understanding of the world. Despite this reputation, his legacy is forever marred because of his involvement with the Nazi Party. Again, I will use this word controversial quite often this afternoon. He claimed he was never anti-Semitic, but research and evidence says, sorry, Charlie, you were a Nazi, all right? So now the gossipy thing. He's 35 years old, he's married, he has 2 sons, and he has an affair with a student, one Hannah Arendt. Now, she did have a controversial, complicated relationship with him. She idolized him, calling him, quote, the hidden king of the realm of thinking. It's such German romanticism, you know. He was also her mentor and for years her friend. She cautiously defends him at a post-World War II denazification hearing, characterizing his association with the Nazi Party as, quote, a personal error. Fun fact, years after she moves to New York and is married, in her apartment, at her desk, you would find 2 photos at her desk. Right here, a photo of her husband, and over here, one of Martin Heidegger. So she was very devoted. So, does Hannah Arendt's personal life cancel out her professional one? I have bigger fish to fry. I really don't care about the relationship, but I'm sure there's a film, and I'm sure in the film it distorts the truth with great cinematic aplomb. So again, I'll leave that up for you to discover and decide. So in 1925, she begins to write, and she writes a book called De Schatten, where she discusses her struggles with her Jewishness. In English, it would be called The Shadows. She discusses her sense of alienation and what sounds like to me basic insecurities about a young woman in love with an older man. Then she goes on to study St. Augustine, and she embraces Christian existential philosophy, which views each individual is ultimately responsible for his or her actions. In 1928, at the University of Heidelberg, she's 22, she's granted a doctorate, and her dissertation, The Idea of Love and St. Augustine, was published. That same year, she marries a fellow philosophy student, Gunther Stein. Oh, here's the lovely Heidegger. Isn't he good looking? You know, love is blind. Love is blind. We all know that. Love is so blind. Okay. Now here, this is more appropriate, right? Okay. So, until 1929, Arendt is surrounded by great philosophers, and she is pursuing this full academic life. She studies German Romanticism, but slowly she turns to the idea of Jewish assimilation and its dangers. And this includes studies of salons, the roots of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, and the burdenness of being Jewish in an increasingly hateful society. So when I heard the word salons, and I am fresh off of Sylvia Beach and Shakespeare and Company, and kind of fresh from Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Tolkien. Okay, I'm going off here.
You are going off.
But you did too.
I haven't even said a word.
I know, but you told me you were. A little bit, put this in late last night. Okay, so anyways, so just for one moment, it's worth mentioning Arendt's biography of a socialite, Rahel Verhagen. Arendt wrote this bio while she was in exile. The book is not published till 1957. So Verhagen hosted one of Europe's premier salons. Think Gertrude Stein in the 1800s. Rahel is also a writer. And throughout her life, same thing. She has this intense, seething hatred of her Jewish identity. Looking at her work today, scholars argue that this is an unjust criticism. She is actually upset about the limitations that are placed on her, and because she is Jewish in this salon society itself. Arendt saw her as a kindred spirit. Another assimilated Jewish woman left stateless in Germany because of her Jewishness. And in this case with Arendt, it's the rising Nazi power. In the midst of the Nuremberg laws, Arendt declares in newspaper articles that Jewish assimilation of Verhagen's era is over. She says, quote, no baptismal papers can protect you from prosecution.
It's true.
With the rise of Nazi power, Arendt's academic career would not flourish in strong-arm Germany. Arendt and Stein feel endangered. They're right. And her husband flees to Paris, but Arendt stays in Berlin, using her apartment as an underground railroad, very much like Sylvia Beach did. For those trying to escape, she writes brazenly anti-Nazi articles, determined to tell the world what is happening to Germany. Can you see why I like her? She sees assimilated Jews as flawed, dangerously threatening the Jewish existence, and she plunges in to Zionist activities. This woman's work is illegal, and she and her mother are turned in by a librarian. Think about that. They're arrested and imprisoned by the Gestapo in 1933. This is the year Hitler comes to power. Once released, they get the hell out of Germany. They go crossing on foot over the mountains into Czechoslovakia, making their way by Prague, then train to Geneva, then finally making their way to Paris. Now completely focused on the Zionist cause, she dedicates herself to something called Youth Aliyah, an organization that at the time finds homes for Jewish orphans in the British Mandated Palestine. This program is now association with an international organization called Hadassah, and we have a chapter here in Jacksonville and members here today who belong. I could go on and on. She continuously works tirelessly in France. Unfortunately, in 1937, she and her husband divorced. Also that year in France, because she's considered German, even though she has no German papers, she's considered an enemy alien. Anyways, so she is even traveling everywhere, publishing her own works because no one else would, because she's Jewish. She travels to Palestine to work for the Zionist cause. I could go on. She must have operated solely on three things: coffee, typewriter ribbons, and cigarettes. In 1940, she marries Heinrich Blücher, a professor of philosophy, and theirs was a rich marriage devoted to each other and their work, with Blücher a long life mentor. In that same year, her status as an enemy alien leads to her arrest. If you read Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosé, her internment, the first step, may ring familiar, because just like in the book, Hannah Arendt reports to the Velodroma Diva and was then sent to Camp Ur in southern France. It is awful, filthy, rainy, muddy, with trough toilets which are reached through the muck and dirt. In her voice, Arendt, here is an excerpt from a letter reprinted from Elizabeth Young Buehler's excellent 1982 bio, Hannah Arendt, For the Love of the World. Quote, "A few weeks after our arrival at camp, France was defeated, and in the chaos we succeeded in getting hold of our liberation papers, which we were able to leave camp. One had to leave with nothing but a toothbrush. There existed no means of transportation. There existed no French underground at the time. None of us could describe what lay in store for those who left behind." According to the United States Holocaust Museum and Memorial, approximately 2,600 souls were murdered at Auschwitz from Gurs. Arendt escaped to Portugal, and then with the help of Varian Fry, which I believe is depicted in the show Transatlantic, she makes her way to New York. In the U.S., she and her husband get assistance from the Zionist Organization of America. She teaches herself English from self-teaching books. Again, works, writing about the Jewish cause, writing academic papers, writing about anti-Semitism. Her Wikipedia entry, if you copy it, because I measured it, and you put it into Word, and you do 10-point type, 90 pages. 90 pages, okay?
But 10-point type, who reads 10-point type?
Nothing's ever good enough.
I'm just saying.
I know.
Who reads 10.5?
I'm kidding. I was working with like the tens. Okay. She also worked You're killing me.
I know I'm going to get it back in space.
She also worked tirelessly to preserve the writings of several Jewish authors because understand Jews weren't allowed to publish during the war years. Okay, now take a deep breath because yay, the war is now over. Clearly I skipped a few things. The war, and I found this beautiful color picture. So yay, birth and little babies. So we're all happy now. The war is over. So her next chapter begins in 1951 with the publication of her first major book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, originally titled Burden of Our Time. Well, you can pretty much get the gist of this book by judging the cover. She argues that the roots of communism and this sickness, in my words, of Nazi mentality are found in imperialism and anti-Semitism, the 19th century. So let me just distill that. The idea of infinite expansion of politics and policies that just go beyond any state or country, just, take over things, combined with anti-Jewish racism. Essentially, you could say a globalization idea of taking over the world. And of course, all this is made possible by making groups feel isolated and then create policies that lend to giving the government control. Then you try to empower those who feel disenfranchised. And then you isolate. It sounds familiar. Depend on a policy of power and propaganda, and you rule it by fear and terrorism.
What year was it published?
Pardon me?
The year it was published.
51. Since 2016, this book is selling like gangbusters, even with a cover like this and a title like this. This combination leads to a regime, Hannah argues, that is worse than tyranny because it turns people into cogs in a machine. It rewards people who check out. They don't think. And it can be so successful. And the name for this is totalitarianism. The reviews were mixed. Scholars said, you cannot use anti-Semitism for every factor of every century of the 20th century's totalitarian regime. She was taking things way too personally. And also, that's not scholarship. Well, that was 1951. Since then, academics are having a real big rethink about it, okay? And Hannah Arendt credits her oldest and best friend, Mary McCarthy, of the group, for inspiring her to write this book.
Right here.
And Ruth Cohen brought in a book that is a book of their correspondences, Letter Among Friends, if you would like to read more about their amazing relationship. Yes, they were friends who met in the 1940s because they shared a common interest in philosophy, politics, and literature. Both were part of a larger group of intellectuals who we could really belong to, called the New York Intellectuals, because, we're all here. Okay, anyway. So in 1958, she goes on, and I had to find things in color, because, it can be very dull. So here's a nice, bright red cover, okay? In 1958, she publishes The Human Condition. Contrary to the very depressing origins of totalitarianism, in this book we find Hannah Arendt the optimist. She says, hey, you've got three choices when you're here on this earth. You can just squeak on by, eat, sleep, not do much. Or you can complain to people, you can post things, how miserable things are. Or you can live a fully engaged, active life. And that doesn't mean getting in your 10,000 steps every day. A full life for her means, and I'm glad you're sitting down, it means embracing politics. Now relax, we're okay. Now remember, she studied Greek, okay? Politics, okay, all right. She believes that politics enriches our culture. It gives us purpose. It gives us identity. It instills civil discourse with one another. Because she studied Socrates, Aristotle, etc., in her view, participating instead of complaining, getting your rear end out there and saying and thinking and participating, this leads to a full life. It lifts up the entire polis, the entire society, because you're engaged, you care. Well, that is my unscholarly summary of this book, and I don't suggest you read it because even the scholars say it's too dense and the writing style is awkward. So look what I saved you, so much. Okay, so Arendt's professional arc continues to rise. She is the first woman to hold full-rank professorship at Princeton University. And when asked how she felt about this achievement, thank you so much, this is what she replies. Hold on 1 minute. You know, they say, so you're the first woman at Princeton, and how do you feel about that? And she says, I don't know, I've always been a woman. Okay. Many, many reviews, and many people in this room can relate, thank you, to this type of sentiment. And she always responded in the most sophisticated kind way that made the interviewer feel so small. You know, how does it feel to be a philosopher and, you know, how to be in a man's profession? And she just sit back and light the cigarette and say, actually, and it's just fabulous. Okay. She goes on to publish more about modern society in a book called Between Past and Future in 1961. And I'll just sum up that book by saying the theme of that is listen to your parents and your mother was right. Okay? So it's all about institutional knowledge and passing on tradition, right? So if you would just, everything will be okay, Hannah says, just listen. Okay, please don't touch the stove. Okay, so anyway. So no one is appalled by her, no one's upset by her, but remember I said it's 1961. In that year, Adolf Eichmann is kidnapped in Argentina and taken to Israel and put on trial. Arendt felt it was her duty to report on this trial. It just so happens, by the grace of God, the remaining prisoners at Urs, where she was imprisoned in France, were eventually transported to their murders under Eichmann's orders. Her reporting, Eichmann in Jerusalem, which appeared in the 1963 February and March issues of The New Yorker, is the work that propelled her from academia to the public square. And you can buy all those editions right there on eBay if you're ready to spend $200 to bid on an original New Yorker that has her reporting in it. Why does this work, published in 1963 and also in a book that year, result in her being condemned, labeled an anti-Semite and anti-Zionist? All right, we got to put ourselves there. Okay, it's 1963, right? Consider the visceral response to her treatment of the defendant Eichmann, a name now we forever associate with evil, like the word Nazi or Auschwitz. Finally caught and then portrayed by our reporter as a mere normal guy. Normal. Time does not permit me going into a bio of Eichmann, but just know this. He was responsible for the transport that led to the murder of approximately 5 million of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in Europe. Arendt would say today he's just a logistics guy. Arendt the philosopher, explains that throughout his entire life, this guy was a follower. He was a joiner. Look, we all want to belong to a tribe. This is human nature, to be part of a group. She says he was, quote, fed up with his job as a traveling salesman even before the vacuum oil company became fed up with him. And from a humdrum life without significance or consequence, the wind had blown him into history with a capital H, into which somebody like him, already a failure in the eyes of his social class and his family, and hence his own eyes as well, he could start from scratch and make a career. And that he did. Sounds normal. Look, Eichmann, she reveals, he didn't even know what the SS was. In fact, he never read Mein Kampf. He was this close to joining the local Freemasons group when someone came to him and inquired about joining the SS. His decision? Sure, why not? Continuing in the classic Arendt voice, quote, and that was how it happened. That's all there was to it. But not really, obviously. What we learned that he personally never had anything whatsoever against Jews. On the contrary, he had plenty of private reasons for not being a Jew hater. She tells of his own Jewish ancestry on his mother's side. He had an affair with a Jewish woman. She points out that even though this guy was not a reader, he had read Theodor Herzl's book, The Jewish State, and he considered himself a Zionist. Okay? I learned in this book that a lot of Nazis considered themselves Zionists. Why? It's a great way to get rid of the Jews. Get them the hell out of here, send them over there. Very simple. That was before Fancy. That was before the final solution. Eichmann, he knew Hebrew. He also knew a little Yiddish. This was shocking to me. I'm telling you this and I get goosebumps, but not shocking to Arendt. She comments, that wasn't so hard. Quote, since Yiddish is basically a German dialect, just older, and it's written with Hebrew letters, any German-speaking person can understand it, even if they've mastered just a few Hebrew words. Quote, we ask, how could this man murder so many? Why? We have so many questions in 2023, as Arendt did, covering the trial. Her questions, though, were controversial, taboo. Quote, how could the Jews, through their own leaders, cooperate in their own destruction? Why did they go to their death like lambs to slaughter? Suggesting that the Jewish people themselves carried blame. Unacceptable. Today, we call that blaming the victim. But these questions in 1963 spurred outrage. Insulting was also her writing style, the use of irony, skepticism, humor. Now add her scathing criticism of the entire Israeli justice system. To her, the entire trial was a farce. It didn't serve justice. Rather, it was a symbolic act to place blame somewhere on someone. She defines the deified Ben-Gurion as the stage manager of the proceedings. Whether the prosecution can prove the specifics of the case, irrelevant. In Arendt's voice, quote, justice demands that the accused be prosecuted, defended, and judged, and that all the other questions, why did it happen? Why the Jews? Why the Germans? What role of other nations? To what extent were the Allies involved? Though they may seem of greater import must be left in abeyance. This justice, she writes, this justice in Israel, this mockery of a courtroom, this insists on the importance of Adolf Eichmann. Arendt argues, this guy's not important. Readers are incredulous. Even her friend Mary McCarthy was deeply critical, saying she was being insensitive. Arendt posits that Eichmann wasn't a monster. He was not a sociopath. He was a regular Joe, a paper shuffler, a clown incapable of thinking anything other than a cliche. The murdering of millions, this was just a job. As far as he was concerned, he had nothing to do with the killing of Jews. He says, I never killed a Jew. Or for that matter, I never killed a non-Jew. I never killed any human being. I never gave an order to kill a Jew or an order to kill a non-Jew. I just didn't do it. Half a dozen psychiatrists before the trial, they certified him normal. He was low-hanging fruit for the Nazi propaganda machine. Arendt argues that Eichmann's mind, absent a thought, is incapable of guilt or incapable of being human. He is a perfect tool for the totalitarian regime. And there are lots of normal Eichmanns out there, capable of evil. The trouble, quote, with Eichmann was precisely that there were so many like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sarcastic, that they will and still are terribly and terrifyingly normal. From the viewpoint of our legal institutions and our moral standards of judgment, this normality was much more terrifying than the atrocities put together. This is a sophisticated argument, and for many, it crosses a line. My God, what would it mean if the Holocaust could not be explained by monstrous men? What does that say about the victims and their memory? What does it say about the bystanders who did nothing? Their actions, is this normal? Society as a whole? Is this who we are? We are capable of no thought? Okay, so you combine her profile of Eichmann as everyman with her questioning of the Jews' role in their fate and the factor she's reporting on this trial not 20 years since the gates of the camps were open, you can understand why she produces strong emotion. This is why, in my opinion, that her years devoted to philosophy, youth aliyah, Jewish relief organizations, writing, editing for Jewish causes is now discredited. She is a distorter of history now. Does this affect our independent thinker, Hannah Arendt? Nope. Not at all. Arendt taught at prestigious universities beginning in 1951 onward, never accepting tenure, always cherishing her independence. Notre Dame, Berkeley, Princeton, Northwestern, University of Chicago. She writes about the US and French revolutions. She begins teaching at the New School for Research in New York City. She writes, teaches, lectures, publishes until her last work, Exploring Thought, Will, and Judgment, goes unfinished because she dies of a heart attack in 1975. At her funeral, her longtime friend, Mary McCarthy, wrote a moving eulogy describing their friendship as a long and joyful, stimulating conversation that lasted for 35 years. And here's an excerpt from their book where Mary McCarthy is in love with a guy who's really a loser. And basically Arendt is saying, either accept him where he is, honey, or kick him to the curb. They had a very close relationship. Tabling emotions about Arendt. Her reputation as one of the most influential philosophers and political theorists of the 20th century. We cannot deny this, and this is my argument as a regular person, not a scholar or academic. She reminds me of Ayn Rand, who you also love or hate. I'm a fan of both of these women because they are independent thinkers who strive for a full active life. And God bless Arendt, she saw the political life as a heroic activity, keeping with the highest values of our culture. I think if she were alive today and she saw our political landscape, she would at once be appalled, but not surprised. Why? Because individuals today don't think for themselves. They're not concerned with facts. They take comfort in a false narrative, otherwise known as propaganda or lies. And this, Arendt says, is the slippery slope to totalitarianism. According to this scholar, Richard Benjamin, who coined the term Arendtian.
You said his name was Bernstein before.
Well, it's close. It's a B. It's a B. It's a B. So picky. So picky.
And she said he was a and then she said he was a piano player.
Do you know one
of Leonard
All right,
Bernstein?
I don't know if it's
He was a
Bernstein.
conductor.
I don't know. I'm looking at the camera. I don't know. Full disclaimer, I don't know. To be in the notes below. Okay. According to this very cute man who really knows a lot about Hannah Arendt, much more than me, he coined the term Arendtian. He said, Arendt believes that lying is the most destructive action that can be. It can be frighteningly successful because there's a form of lying when you're no longer aware you're lying to yourselves or others. A most chilling thought, oh my God, it says Bernstein down here. I have no idea why I'm even up here. I'm so sorry. It could be Bernstein. I'm so embarrassed. Okay, delete.
Don't
okay, a most chilling thought he shared that I thought was Arendt's warning about the parallels between pre-war Germany and post-war America. She died in 1975. Okay. Quote, evil comes from a failure to think. It defies thought. For as soon as thought tries to engage itself with the evil and examine the premises and principles from which it originates, it's frustrated because it finds there's nothing there. And that is the banality of evil. So now you know Arendt. You know her voice through the Eichmann report. Remember my disclaimer? My research clearly is not scholarly, but that doesn't negate the fact that knowing Arendt is important. And obviously we must confront our reality today. Arendt teaches us to stop, think, engage in facts, not emotions, not false narratives. Is Arendt's controversial legacy warranted? Or is her tone, her sardonic delivery, actually a sophisticated rebuke to a man's darkest actions and mankind's darkest potential? Think for yourself and decide. Thank you.
I know, just what time it is. Okay. What I just want to say one thing about Adolf Eichmann. I mean, he must have been quite an actor, if he, to impress her with the response that she gave. I mean, he had to be an actor, a great liar.
No, I absolutely believe that he was doing the right thing, because there were so many quotes I didn't add about how he'll go to his grave knowing he did the right thing, and he did nothing wrong. I think it's almost a defense mechanism to think that he was playing her, because he is incapable, because you check out.
Then he must have been a psychopath. I mean, come on.
But I think what she's trying to do is really poke the bear and say every one of us are capable of being evil. It's very Jungian, right? Everyone, we all have a shadow. right? And given the right circumstances, that shadow can take over your life.
He must, I mean, shadow, he had to have he had to have he wore a cloak.
Well, you stop thinking. You just turn it off.
All right, well, I guess everybody's ready for Charlotte Salomon after that.
Yes, aren't we though?
After many years of study, I thought I knew most of the well-known artists who addressed the Shoah. I mean, after all, my husband and I collect art of the Holocaust. The Shoah, the horrific event that wiped out 6 million of my people. Boy, was I chastened. It turns out that there is a giant with whom I was not even familiar, and today is dedicated to her enormous body of work, her exquisite eye, and her remarkable story, and not to mention her extraordinary legacy. It turns out her work is the largest single work of art made by a Jewish artist during the Shoah. And so I'm going to use the word Shoah and Holocaust interchangeably. Shoah is Hebrew for catastrophe. Holocaust is a Greek word meaning burnt whole. And so there's sometimes Jewish people in particular don't like the word Holocaust because of the sacrificial, Holocaust is also known, one of the meanings of it is refers to sacrificial offerings. So that's just a little sidebar. We're looking right now at are you ready? This word is just, my German is not so great, but a Stolpersteine, a commemorative memorial marker, essentially a paving stone covered in brass that bears the name of the life and dates of victims of Nazi extermination and persecution. And this one's in Berlin, and there are about 10,000 of these in Berlin currently. And this one reads, "Here lived Charlotte Salomon, born 1917 in Berlin, fled to France in 1939, interned at Gur, the same camp where Hannah Arendt was, and a scholar that I've read quite a lot of said that if only Charlotte Salomon had been a known artist, that Hannah Arendt might have helped her escape. And deported it to Drancy. Drancy was a transit camp north of Paris where German and other Jews who were found in France were sent before they were put on trains to Auschwitz. And then in 1943, she was sent to Drancy and then sent in a cattle car to Auschwitz. But what this Stolpersteine doesn't say is that Charlotte Salomon was born to parents Alfred and Francisca, or in France, she was in France because her grandparents had landed there, and where she could get a visa out of Berlin to be a caretaker. She said her grandmother was ill, and she used that as the reason to get the visa, obtain the visa, or that she was interned at Gur for 2 months with her very, very difficult grandfather, and that she was 26 years old and 5 months pregnant when she was immediately marched to the gas chambers, October of 1943. So that's, you don't have that. Are you going to, at least you could move my slides for me.
Grief.
This is a story about a young German, middle-class, highly cultured, artistically gifted, musically knowledgeable, assimilated Jewish woman named Charlotte Salomon, whose photo we see on the screen, painting in the garden of her only patron, Ottilie Moore, a Brooklynite, no less, whose German father was the sausage king of New York. And that allowed her to own a villa in the south of France. Now, by way of context, Salomon managed to get out of Berlin right after Kristallnacht. Now, or if you don't know what that is, it's the night of broken glass. It was an event of burning, looting, pillaging, and desecration of mainly synagogues in Germany and Austria, November 9th and 10th, 1938. That event was enough for her parents, who wanted her to join the maternal grandparents, the Grunwalds, and boy, are they a pair, the Grunwalds, who were staying in a villa called La Hermitage, or the Hermitage, in Villefranche, which is right, it's close to Nice in the south of France. And that the La Hermitage was owned by Mrs. Moore, who the Grunwalds, you're going to love this. I mean, there's a lot about this story that will break your heart. But the Grunwalds, her grandparents, had met Mrs. Moore, where else? On a cruise. You know how you meet people on cruises and you become friends? And that's how they managed. She invited them in 1933 to come live with her. And this Mrs. Moore, I wish we had more time, but Mrs. Moore was a righteous Gentile. She rescued Jewish orphans, among other things, and she was so hospitable to the Grunwalds and, of course, to Charlotte. And as you will learn, Salomon was enchanted by the spectacular vistas along the Mediterranean in Villefranche-sur-Mer. And it was at this spot that she created a single work, Life or Theater, which is on the right, the cover of which is on the right. It combines art and text and music, and it reveals this intimate visual narrative. It's very original. It's like nothing that we've ever seen before. It was groundbreaking, and it had a very unique visual language. Now, according to the eminent feminist scholar, Professor Griselda, I love her first name, Griselda Pollock, whose tome, Charlotte Salomon and the Theater of Memory, has greatly elevated the scholarship on the topic of Charlotte Salomon. She says the work is divided into three distinct parts. The prologue is divided into acts, like acts of a play or an opera, and it deals with Salomon's early years up to 1937. The second section is the main part of Life or Theater, and it is designed like chapters, as if it were a book. And it's about her great love, Salomon's great love for her stepmother's music teacher. He was a voice this is just going to get so dicey. A voice teacher and a Nietzsche acolyte, and his name was Alfred Wolfson. Wolfsons? I don't know if they're related to the Wolfsons here. That's also another story for another day. Wolfson had been a World War I veteran and been completely traumatized by the experience. In fact, he had been buried over corpses and somehow managed to survive. Her relationship, Salomon's relationship, even though he was 20 years older than her, she fell in love with him, but I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm always nervous when I'm behind. Okay, so he's the focus of the second section of Life or Theater, the main part. And the final part is not in divisions at all. Rather, it's an epilogue. It's designed as an epilogue or conclusion about her time in the south of France, 1939 to 1942. She uses popular music, songs as captions along with stage directions, and also included instructions as to what music to listen to while you were looking at the art, even what songs to hum. Now, it's important to remember that Life or Theater is not fiction, nor is it completely autobiographical. So after art history in the afternoon, after teaching it to Bowl students for so many years, I hope you'll stay with me because it gets a little complicated here. Nor is Life or Theater a graphic novel. It's more like a memoir. It's vast, it's sequential, and it combines the real world with what you might think of as flights of fancy. Maybe you're having a flight of fancy while I'm talking. What is fascinating is that a 22 to 25-year-old Charlotte, English and German, is a superb storyteller. She's knowledgeable about music, visual art, contemporary cinema, history, philosophy, and literature. She's really wise and smart. By the way, you see the word Singspiel on the lower part of the cover page. Loosely translated, a singspiel is a musical play. Sometimes it's akin to light opera, and I've seen it even described as a cabaret on paper. I mean, your flight of fancy can take you to what that means. Amidst this cultural, historical, intellectual setting, we learn that Salomon's family is no ordinary family. Now, I realize we all don't think our families are ordinary. I know that for a fact. Rather, her family is a family of many dark secrets. We also have secrets in our families, I know that too. But these are particularly painful secrets, such as love triangles, nervous breakdowns, drug overdoses, molestation, and shockingly, numerous suicides. So that's just a prelude to all the fun we're going to have together. Now, one of the theories Pollock advances, the professor, is that of motivation. Why did she make this book? She made it in France. And, here are some theories. Why did Salomon, an enemy alien, I mean, at that point she was an enemy alien in Nazi-occupied France, paint almost 1,200 pages within a year or so? Where did her drive originate? How was a young woman able to accomplish all she did in such a short time? Pollock surmises that there were 4 key reasons that we will look at today. One was that she was maternally deprived. It's no secret, I'm going to be sharing this with you shortly. Her mother committed suicide when she was 8 years old, so she had to live with that. The second was that due to being Jewish in Weimar and Nazi Germany, she was a socially excluded adolescent. And thirdly, she was exiled as a young adult at 22. She was sent away from her parents. She was sent away from the only home that she had known. And then she was assigned caregiver to her difficult, and that's being kind, grandparents. And finally, number 4, she was witness to psychological breakdowns and suicides. Yes. Now, I wanted to give you an example of what some of the pages look like, and we're going to be analyzing this one shortly. This is from the prologue. The single work, Life or Theater, is, as I said, it had 1,200 pages, 779, yes, 779. I mean, if you think about this, Van Gogh made approximately 800 paintings in 10 years. This woman, young woman, and unknown, and never had an art exhibition, never was reviewed by a critic, made 779 gouaches, each image measuring 10 by 13 inches. And can you move ahead, please? Yes. And then we're going to go back. Yes. I want to show you, in case you didn't know what a gouache was, gouache is a medium. It's a type of paint similar to watercolor with the addition of white pigment to make it opaque, meaning it doesn't let light in. So there's an orange here. On the left you see the gouache, and on the right you see the difference in the watercolor. Now, she used, you can go back please if you would. She uses 3 primary colors, the 3 primaries, red, yellow, and blue, and then whatever else you'll see, she mixes to make secondary and tertiary colors. So with 779 gouaches, 330 overlays made of tracing paper. In some of the images, she wrote over just with her handwriting, to explain what was going on. Okay, to add more text, what you'd call it maybe color. And then approximately 15 pages of painted text, where it's just all writing. Like she wrote a confessional at the end, and some of that is also included. Now, if you placed all these gouaches side by side, it would reach the length of 3 New York City blocks. And I bet they mean the long ones between like 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th. And those are, if you have to walk them, there's a long. No wonder that the descriptor of this work, monumental, is often used when discussing the project. Now, it's unusual. Now, follow me very carefully, okay? You are awake. The people in her life are recast in this book, okay? And they're given different aliases, and the aliases relate to their characters, all right? So, for instance, Charlotta calls the character Charlotta Kahn, which means can, okay, in German, K-A-N-N. We'll get to some of the others in a minute. You're gonna love what she calls her stepmother. Okay. It's about, now, it's of course, the story is hers. The story is all about her. But she does take artistic license, and artists, of course, do that. Now, it's about the artist, but yet she writes it in the third person, and you never see the word I in any of the text. And it's about her, it's about love, it's about creativity, it's about death, and it includes many cultural references. And there's so much extraordinary about it. Not only is it groundbreaking, it's original, it's prolific, but when we stop to think about the conditions in which she worked, it really defies logic. The gouaches were created at, when she was really under such enormous pressure. Would she be turned in? Would she be taken away? I mean, after all, she had one short visit to Gur with her grandfather, and you already know from Stacey how horrific the conditions were, and that was just in southwestern France. And she was making art that could have immediately caused her death. That's the other thing to keep in mind. The Nazis, we're going to get into this in a second, but remember that all the modernist art that was, the leading art of the time was considered degenerate by the Nazis. They felt they were afraid of it, I think, because they were afraid of the freshness of it and what it represented. And it didn't represent what the Nazis felt was important, and so it was deaccessioned. Most of the modern art, the contemporary art, the Matisses, the Picassos, the German Expressionists, the Munchs, the Van Goghs, that was all taken off the walls and either sold, burned, or there was a huge exhibition called the Entartete Kunst, or the Degenerate Art Show, in 1937 in Munich, where all these artists were censored, and some of them killed themselves. Ernst Nolde killed himself. Okay, now I've really gotten off topic. Okay, can we go
Van Gogh?
Yeah, go to the Van Gogh. Uh-huh. So we're looking now at a Vincent van Gogh self-portrait. Before he cut off his ear. It was a self-portrait dedicated to Paul Gauguin. He had a bromance with him. He wanted to have, it was his bromance in his mind. This was the time when he invited Gauguin to come to Arles in the south of France and paint together. So this is his work before that. I wanted you to see the self-portrait of Charlotte Salomon. This is not in the Life or Theater. And because I wanted you to see how knowledgeable she was in terms of modernism, which, as I said, was the prevailing international style as advanced by Matisse and Van Gogh and many others. As a young girl, Charlotte was taken abroad. Her grandparents took her to Rome. She had a big thing for Michelangelo. Well, who doesn't have a big thing for Michelangelo? And of course, if you've ever been to Berlin, it's like a museum capital of the world. There's so many museums there, there's no way to see them all in a short stay. She was also an art student at the most prestigious art school in Germany as a young teen, where a professor had actually gone to bat for her. This was after 1933, but before, obviously, she left. It enabled her to become a student during the early Nazi years, having her entrance approved. You're going to love this, because she was so quiet that the professors believed that she would not interfere with any of the Aryan men. In other words, she wouldn't be a distraction, right? Now, during her second year, they had a blind competition, and her work was chosen the best of all the students in her cohort. And when the majority of professors learned whose work had been selected. Are you ready for this? They declined to give her the recognition and prompting her to drop out. So at the time these self-portraits were painted, both these artists are in a kind of an exile. Charlotte was stateless. Her exile, I think, could be described as external. Van Gogh, before he cuts his ear off, his exile was internal. He was just such an unusual and strange person. Again, we could talk about him for the whole hour and however I'm going to try to move it along here. The similarities, though, are striking. And the reason I really wanted to show you both of these was to show you how good she was. I mean, you put her up against Van Gogh and she holds her own. I mean, yes, she saw his work. The German expressionists loved Van Gogh for lots of reasons. But the fact is that, her work is not derivative. It's very, it's so original. Okay. The similarities are striking, their sideways glances, their chiseled eyes, their chiseled looks, their suspicious expression, their piercing eyes. And art critics think that, Van Gogh, he really had a thing for Japanese everything, art and so forth. And even the eyes here, you have a Japanese look to them. Along with the background is acid green. I know this slide's not going to be that great. The use of pinks and greens in his head contrast with her darker skin and her skin tones. And she's also got some blues around her ear and on the right side of her face. Okay, next. Now, Stacey, the devil made you do it. Well, Stacey made me put in a few slides to show you what I mean when I say German expressionist. On the left, you see Edvard Munch. He was Norwegian, but he was very influential to the German expressionist. Remember, he's the artist who made the Scream. And again, you see those light bulb faces that you saw in the Scream. And then on the right, one of my favorite German expressionists, he's the one who he was even sympathetic with the Nazis, but they destroyed a lot of his work, and he committed suicide. He just couldn't handle it. And anyway, keep going. I could talk about him all day.
Okay.
And then the two artists, Beckmann and Dix, they actually served in the German army in World War I, and they were so horrified of what happened during the war that they came back and made paintings that were so violent and so critical of the war, and they tried to warn against another. And Beckmann, in particular, there's a rape going on in that picture, the night, and then Dix, he shows three veterans cheating each other at cards, the scat game. They're just wonderful, wonderful painters. So along with Van Gogh, Salomon would have known these artists, Munch, Kirchner, Beckmann, Dix, Kathy Kollwitz. Apparently she knew Kathy Kollwitz, Matisse, Chagall, Rodin, Nietzsche, the philosopher, he's not an artist, writer, Goethe. And then she also was knowledgeable and knew the composers, knew their work, Bach, Beethoven, Schubert, even Bizet, among others. And of course, she was familiar with Sigmund Freud and Hannah Arendt. Now, between travels abroad with her family, it's likely that's how she was exposed to some of these artists. It's not known for a fact, but she could have been at the Degenerate Art Show when it came to Berlin. We don't know that for a fact. Okay, keep going. I'm going to just show you this one very quickly. We're going to skip over it. This is in the prologue of Life or Theater. Lots of scenes. So she had a happy childhood, okay? And I wanted you to see how she divided it up into different registers or segments. And she would have known about some of the medieval manuscripts. I mean, she was a real student of art history. Okay, keep going. And this one is terribly tragic. This is another scene showing her as a young child whose vision is reflective of the tragedy of her unstable parent, her mother. And this is in the prologue. It's Charlotte, it's a heaven. The one on the left is a heaven prologue, and then the one on the right is Charlotte waiting for her mother at night, to come home at night. So just quickly, her parents met. They were both medical workers during World War I. They met at the front. Her father was a surgeon. He was a very famous surgeon after the war. Her mother was a nurse, and they fell in love at the front and married in 1916. Okay, follow me very carefully here because there are two names that are the same, and it's important to keep them straight. Unbeknownst to our artist, who was 8 years old at the time, Charlotta, her mother's name was Francisca. Francisca had a sister also named Charlotta. Charlotta, the mother's sister, or our Charlotta's aunt, committed suicide by drowning herself in an icy lake in 1913. And this was an action that Francisca, our Charlotta's mother, never recovered from because she felt like it was her. She was responsible. I mean, they had, by the way, it's not, I mean, we're going to get there soon, I hope. It's no secret that they had suicides there was DNA in their family. 3 generations of the family were suicidal, 2 men and 6 women. I mean, it's just so painful. It's so incredibly painful. So on the left, we see a dreamy composition composed of several scenes within one frame. On the lower left, you see a mother, and by the way, they would be named Charlotta Kahn and Francisca Kahn in the work. We see a mother tenderly holding her young daughter in a cozy bed with a vibrant red blanket cover. In the text associated with this image, Francisca says this to Charlotta, and this will just totally break your heart. How beautiful heaven was, promising that she would go there one day and become an angel, that she, the mother, would go there one day and become an angel. Who tells that to an 8-year-old? And become an angel, and that she would send a letter telling her daughter everything. Now, we also see in the same area multiple images of Francisca ascending to heaven. Some scholars say that it's similar or likened to Jacob's ladder. You know how Jacob ascended the ladder when he was having the dream, where a horizontal panoply of people await her, as well as God, who is in the center, and God is sitting on a throne. Now, if you shift to the middle right, you see Francisca, who has now become an angel, delivering a letter through the windowsill to Charlotta, who is seen talking to her mother in the lower right side. And according to Professor Pollack, quote, Francisca was of a somewhat sentimental disposition. I guess we could say that was an understatement. She would often take the child to bed with her and tell her about a life after death in celestial spheres, a life that was said to be simply glorious, for which she seemed to have a terrible yearning. So, I mean, here we have this, tremendous scholar saying that, that this was true, that this was a fact, that the mother glorified going to heaven. The second slide on the right shows multiple broken-hearted Charlotta standing at the windowsill waiting for a letter from her mother. It reads, Charlotta can't sleep well anymore. She gets up 10 times a night to see whether or not there is any angelic trace, or at least a letter lying on the windowsill. She is very disappointed. And then this is one of the images that has 2 overlays. Not that many. That was a rare occurrence. And the overlay reads, quote, "Why does my mummy not come? She promised," end quote. In reality, Charlotta waited for a long time before she knew the truth about what happened to her mother. She wasn't told until late 1939, after the suicide of her grandmother. Remember that she was in France with her grandmother, and she was having to watch. She was a caretaker for her grandmother. and she creates this body of work that is remarkable. Now, the next one we're just going to look at just shortly. This is, we're still in the prologue, and this one is called the Manifesto. And I wanted you to see this because it shows you how she became, she adopted an artistic sense of herself. And that's, I think, where she really grew her courage and grew her name, if you will. She understood that she was a serious artist. And you can see that because she also includes symbols from other artists, including Helen. I'll put you on the spot. Who do you see here?
Well, I see Van Gogh's shoes.
Yes, you see the boots, and what else?
And obviously Chagall's style.
Chagall, but what about the Van Gogh's sunflowers? And then you see some jugs and some apples. Thank you, Paul Cézanne. So, in other words, she is, she's learning about what great art really looks like. Okay. Yes.
It's interesting that in the lower left side, you see the chair with the canvas propped on it, and in the very first photograph of her,
yes,
painting, the black and white photograph,
yes, very,
had her canvas
just tilted like that. Yes,
against the back of the chair and her lap.
very, all right.
Exactly what.
Bravo.
You will get
Marcia gets extra credit.
Extra credit from me.
Wait, there's another question for you in the back,
Yes.
Cindy.
Yes.
Well done.
I'm looking at the progress of the figure, her self-portrait.
Yes.
And by the time she gets to present herself, she's showing a much more face
Yes.
instead of a profile, and it's a beautiful face.
Yes.
And there's peace there. There's no worry there.
Yes. And
That's wonderful observation as well.
thank you all. And if you want to interrupt me, please, that's fine with me.
Another?
Yeah, another question? Yes.
Well, what I'm seeing there is she also put a symbol on the side where this is not my first piece. I have other pictures that I've made.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
thank you,
right.
thank you.
So
Well, if I
repeat
had
that.
stuck to my script, I would have mentioned that too. So thank you for bringing that up. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is she signed her works with CS. She did that on purpose. She didn't want to be caught, but she didn't want people to know her religion, her identity, or her gender. Okay, because the more people who thought she was a man, she
better
could have
off.
gotten further in her, in her profession. Okay.
Cindy,
Yes.
I think you said this, but I just need to get it back in my head. When is she painting relative to when she was in her garden and when she was
Leslie,
in camp?
She would not.
France, or where-
She was at La Hermitage. Well, actually, she went to a hotel in Nice after her grandfather was a real.
Piece of work.
I was going to use piece of work, but then that wouldn't. I don't think that sounds very. Well,
He was a schmuckaholic.
God, Stacey.
That says it all.
No, anyway, she went to a hotel. She went to a hotel and just feverishly, but I believe she did if she wasn't finished, she finished up at the villa, La Hermitage.
So what year are we talking?
Oh, we're talking about the late 1940 through 1942.
40 to 42. Is that
Yes.
helpful?
Could she have been manic?
Could she have been manic? What do you think? Well, I think
I mean,
I've never seen the word manic associated with her name,
At
but she
that
was
speed?
she was fevered. She was definitely, because I mean, she every day was a.
mental illness obviously in the family, and one of this is manic depression. And some people spend more time in the manic phase. And
I
so
don't.
that's what I'm thinking with this
I-
amount of work.
I don't know. Maybe so. That's very interesting.
I would definitely say a hypomania at least.
Okay,
Being
next,
an expert.
next.
Wait, Helen has a
How did her
question.
work survive?
Okay, I'm giving away all the big stuff right away.
This is what you want. This is what you
How
want.
did her work survive? When she was finished, she wrapped it up, had a paper around it with a string, and after she went to this I don't know how you pronounced it. I'm going to anglicize it.
I looked it up on Google. It has to be right. I heard it on the internet.
No, well, it's
It was
G-U-R. I don't know. Gur is how I've always heard it pronounced. But she, after the experience there, is when she started. She went to see a doctor because she was she was in such misery, and the doctor told her to paint. And so she took, after she finished, after the year or so, a little bit over a year, she took the package of the 1,200 images or approximately to the doctor, and he apparently buried it for her.
Thank goodness.
He wasn't Jewish. Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah.
That is a beautiful story.
Well,
Cindy. Wow.
Can I
he
be done?
Did that. No, you have more. There's more pictures.
Okay,
Very
just
good
a few,
pictures.
just a few.
Do you want to go to this one?
Yeah, well, I'll just say this about the next few are the one that's on the screen is showing her father and her interpretation of her father from Life or Theater. You notice too that the colors in these keep getting darker and darker, which is really commensurate with the times. And the story about her father, he remarried 4 years after his Francisca had her demise, and he marries a very famous opera star. And but they cannot. There she is. Okay, and the parents cannot get out. Well, I'll say. I just want to say this about. Can you go back to the father
Sure.
1 second? The father had been a very famous surgeon. He lost his professorship and his practice after 1933, after the Nuremberg laws came into effect. Then he was put in charge of the Jewish Hospital of Berlin. And then after Kristallnacht, right around Kristallnacht, he was arrested, tortured, and incarcerated at Sachsenhausen, which was a concentration camp about 21 miles north of Berlin. And because he had married, go to the next one, because he had married this very famous Jewish opera star, she was a contralto, her name was Paulina Lindblom. She was born Paulina Lave, it's spelled L-E-V-I, but I use Google pronunciation too, I hope that's right, Lave in German. And Paulina was able to use her connections, because she had the same thing happen to her in 1933. She was touring all over the capitals of Europe. She was basically kicked out of being able to sing. She was prevented from being able to sing, and she was able to use an association. There was a German Berlin Cultural Association. Now, let's see. The Jewish Cultural Federation, at least I can get that right, and she joined that, and they could not get fake IDs fast enough to be able to join their daughter, and the parents ended up in Amsterdam, and they were taken to Westerbork, which should be familiar to some of you because that's where Anne Frank and her family were taken when they were discovered. And because he was a surgeon, he was spared, and he was put to use, taking care of people, helping people. And he told the Nazis one day that he and his wife needed to go and get medical equipment and supplies, and they left, and they went immediately into hiding, and they were able to survive the war by the fact that they went into hiding. And the other incredible thing is that after the war, they stayed in Amsterdam, and they met Otto Frank, who asked them their opinion about what to do with his daughter's diary. And then I know this is just mind-boggling. And then when the doctor in France, his daughter found the Life or Theater, and it was dedicated to Mrs. Moore because she had rescued the family. Mrs. Moore, called the parents, and they came to France after the war to pick it up. Anyway, and that's how it ended up. It's all together in the Jewish Museum, Jewish Historical Museum in Amsterdam. All right, there are a couple of things. I know you all are so patient.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, it just blows your mind.
Can we just look at, I have to tell you the funniest thing. Go back a second to Paulina, just one thing. In Life or Theater, she renames, and there's just so much rich things going on. Paulina changed Charlotta's life, the real Paulina, the real Charlotta. Paulina brought in people like the Alberts, Einstein and Schweitzer. She had them at home for dinner. She had Rabbi Leo Beck, and maybe some of you have heard that name. He was the head Reform rabbi of Berlin. So Paulina brought culture and joy and just so much happiness to the family's life before 1933. And she also brought in, you can go to the next one,
This good-looking guy.
this guy whose name was Alfred Wolfson. And in the Life or Theater, Charlotta named him, this is so great, Amadeus, and we know what that refers to, Dabber Loin. I'm just so fixated on loin. You know, all my students used to say, oh, Ms. Edelman, all you want to do is talk about sex. And I thought, well, maybe they're right. But no.
You're very right.
Anyway, Dabber Loin, which translates to penniless Mozart, he is the focus of the main section of Life or Theater. He, as I said, was a survivor of World War I. And he lost his job in 1933, and somehow he managed to kind of nudge his way into the Salomon home and become Paulina's voice teacher. Of course, all along he really fell in love with Paulina, but it was Charlotta who fell in love with him. And so that's what I mean by love triangle. And not only did Charlotta was a vulnerable teenager. You know, she'd been, what a horrible, life she had had up to that point. And so scholars are really divided about the depth of Charlotta and Amadeus's or Alfred's relationship, because he was known to be so close to the stepmother. Well, in Life or Theater, we're led to believe that Charlotta and Amadeus had lots going on. And in fact, she carried a big torch for him. New York Review of Books writer Lisa Apinayesi, who I'm sorry,
well done.
Described Wolfson as, quote, a penniless singing coach with a philosophical bent who exalted the singing voice, the movies, and that he really was her first love. And she drew him something over, almost 1,400 close-ups in the middle section. And go to the next one, and that's his photo okay, all right. Yeah, and one can see his imagination, Charlotta's imagination, and what an imagination it was at work in this image of two lovers in the sand. Of course, in reality, there's no evidence of them at a beach. I mean, they were in Berlin, for goodness sake, so clearly there's no beach.
A girl can dream.
Yes, and thankfully she did. Apparently they met at a park, they met at park benches and at cafes, but really they were so, shall we say, taking huge risks, because Jews were prohibited from even sitting on a park bench or going to a cafe at the time. And the next slide is really an important one, because you can see here that it has text on it. And it's really important because it reinforces the impact of his mentorship and his friendship to her. He encouraged her artistic expression, and really his friendship and his help. He critiqued her work. He critiqued the real Charlotta's work as well. And they were the salve, if you will, that kept her sane, and really that kept her going, particularly when she was with her grandparents. And I have to read this. There are just a few more things and we'll be done.
It's scrolled up and you can't read the text.
Oh, I'm sorry. It says, "May you never forget I believe in you."
Now, I want to just read what she wrote about this. It was summer, there were trees and sky and sea, and I saw nothing else, only colors, paintbrush, and you.
Aww.
Okay? People everywhere became too much for me. I had to go further into solitude, completely away from humanity. Then maybe I could find what I had to find, namely myself, a name for me. And anyway, that just, it may not go exactly with this particular one, but it goes to the overview of her feelings for him. Okay, now, this is where things get dicey. The grandfather. In this particular gouache, or this image, the grandfather tells Charlotte Kahn about the deaths in her family. And it was only after, as I said, the grandmother became depressed when she learned that war had been declared in 1939, and her depression became so bad that she tried to hang herself unsuccessfully. And so Charlotte went on a suicide watch, but that she could really not control. So after her grandmother's death, her unloving grandfather chose to tell her the truth about the family legacy. And following this horrific unburdening, she and her grandfather were rounded up and taken to southwestern France in Gurs, where there was not only was it as bad as Stacey said, but there was no running water. The barracks had no windows, there was no insulation, and dysentery and typhus were rampant. So for a time, the miseries were so great that she almost succumbed to the family DNA, but was helped by this doctor. And Leslie, that's the time when she started painting all these images. And it was in the final pages that her grandfather handed her her dead grandmother's quilt, saying, quote, "I don't understand you. What's wrong with sharing a bed with me when nothing else is available?" How's that for gagging? I'm in favor of what's natural. But she had the last word. It was then that Charlotte Salomon, and she confessed to this in a 35-page letter that she wrote to Amadeus Daberloin. She mixed what she described as a veronal omelet. And a veronal is a barbiturate that they used to treat mental illness. She made this veronal omelet and gave it to him to drink. And apparently the dose was enough to, have the last word. Wow. Now, according to Abenesi, she gave him the omelet spiked with barbiturates because she discovered, quote, he, in parentheses, was the thorn of the disease state within me, inside of me. So she later wrote this confession to Wolfson, Daberloin. 19 of those pages were kept from the public for over 60 years. And she moved back to the L'Hermitage after she finished her work. And she was there, she met a Romanian immigrant named Alexander Nagler. I read somewhere that he had been a paramour of Mrs. Moore. I don't know, that's not a fact. That's, as Stacey would say, just sheer gossip. That would be whatever the page 6 of the whatever New York Post. And she married him in June of 1943. And 3 months later, she was arrested, and they were both sent to Drancy. And of course, because she was pregnant, they put her to death immediately because they did not want her to deliver a Jewish child. And he survived for a little while. I mean, he ultimately died, but Nagler lived longer than Charlotte. Now, her last work is this one. And we see her perched like a mermaid on a bluff overlooking the Mediterranean, and we ache for everything that she has experienced, everything she suffered, all she had to give up. At the same time, her art is so beautiful, it's so poignant, and so incredibly her own. We can even point to everyone from Van Gogh to Nolde to Kirchner, and even her Cubist feet here are Picasso-like. And Matisse, the color blue, should remind us of Matisse. And wearing a dark one-piece bathing suit, her legs are tucked underneath her. She advertises the name of the work on her back. And with the simplest of lines and the most expressive brushwork, lets us in while she finishes painting the scene. And she had overcome her dreadful family legacy. And it was Dr. I temporarily had a little doctor, I think its name was Nordis. He had encouraged her to paint her pain, and she gave her entire work to him with these words, and I'm going to close these words because they're so beautiful. Keep these safe. They are my whole life. Wow. Thank you.